John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5 and 14 through 18. Hear now the word of the Lord as he speaks through the Apostle John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me.' For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." This is God's holy and inspired word. Thanks be to him. One of the greatest things about the Christian faith is mystery. There is so much that we don't know. So many things that are mysterious and that we will never fully grasp. We'll never fully wrap our minds around them. We'll never fully appreciate them unless, of course, God himself reveals them to us when we meet him face to face. Divine mystery. For example, the Trinity is mysterious. God's eternal decree is mysterious. The gospel is mysterious. The Lord's Supper is mysterious. And there's even a sense in which our salvation, our redemption, is mysterious. Indeed, many things in the Christian faith are a mystery. And that's a beautiful thing. Now, not everyone is okay with that, but we should be. We don't have to rationalize everything. We don't have to fully comprehend all things. We don't have to know everything that there is to know. As Moses says in Deuteronomy 29:29, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that have been revealed belong to us and our children forever." There are secret things that we cannot know, that we cannot understand, and thus mystery is good, and we ought to embrace it. It ought to make us love and worship God even more, knowing that we can't know everything about him. If you knew everything about God, he wouldn't be worthy of worship. Well, one of the great mysteries in the Christian faith is the doctrine of Christ, Christology. The doctrine of Christ, or Christology. Now, to be sure, there are many things concerning the doctrine of Christ that we can know and that we ought to know and confess. But there are some things that we have to admit are divine mystery. And that's good. For example, the incarnation. How? His divine nature and his human nature. How do they coexist? How does that work? Can you explain it? So this evening, what we're going to do is consider these things. It's actually quite simple. The point of the sermon is this: who is Christ? We're going to answer that question insofar as we are able from the Holy Scriptures and from the great creeds of the Christian church. Who is Christ? And as we seek to come to a deeper knowledge of who Christ is, first we're going to look at the incarnation. Second, the hypostatic union. And third, the only mediator. The incarnation, the hypostatic union, and the only mediator. So first, let's look at the incarnation. Now, maybe you were wondering, why are we singing all these Christmas songs? Well, hopefully now you understand. because we're looking at that most important aspect of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, his coming in the flesh. That's what incarnate means. Incarnate means in the flesh. The doctrine of the incarnation is absolutely essential to the gospel. Remember what the gospel is? The gospel is the good news of the eternally begotten Son coming in the flesh. See, that's the first part of it. Without him coming in the flesh, there is no gospel. There is no living a perfect life. There is no dying on the cross to make atonement for sin. There is no resurrection. There is no ascension and enthronement. There's no intercession right now. There's no future return to judge the living and the dead. So the incarnation is vital. Without him coming in the flesh, taking on human vesture, there is no one, thinking back to a couple of chapters ago, or was it last chapter? It was last chapter. Thinking back to last chapter, there is no one to fulfill the covenant of works on our behalf. There's no second Adam to do the work that Adam failed to do in the garden on our behalf as our covenantal representative. Adam was our covenantal representative in the garden. He failed. The last Adam cannot fail. The last Adam must come in the flesh and live a perfect life. He must do what Israel could never have done, fulfill all the Mosaic laws. He must do what you and I could never do, fulfill the moral law perfectly, perpetually, and as a public person. And so the incarnation is vital. In order to understand our salvation, we need to understand insofar as we are able the incarnation. In order to understand who Christ is, that's the question tonight, who is Christ? We need to understand the incarnation. So this is what the Westminster Divines begin with in the second paragraph of our chapter on Christ. The Son of God, the second person in the Trinity, being very and eternal God, of one substance and equal with the Father, did, when the fullness of time was come, take upon him man's nature. We'll pause there. The eternal Son of God. What does that mean? Is there ever a time that he did not exist? If he's eternal, was there ever a time that he did not exist? No. There was never a time when the Son was not. He always has been. As we heard in our gospel reading, in the beginning was the Word. Remember, that goes back to Genesis. What John's doing is he's saying, hey, remember Genesis 1? Creation? In the beginning was God? Well, guess what? In the beginning was the Word. Word, logos in Greek, is Christ. In the beginning was Christ. And Christ was with God. And Christ was God. This is the Son. He's eternal. He was in the beginning with God because he is God. The Son, as we say, is eternally begotten of the Father, and he is of the same substance of the Father. Now, when I say that, it doesn't sound like much, but there was essentially a century of arguing, fighting over that term. Same substance. There were Orthodox Christians who were placed in prison because they taught that. Same substance. It was the distinction made in the 4th century as the Orthodox Catholic theologians, both of those words apply to us in this sense, Athanasius of Alexandria and the Cappadocian Fathers, Basil of Caesarea, Gregory of Nyssa, and Gregory of Nazianzus. So what they said as they did battle against Arians, when you hear Arians, think of Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay? The Jehovah's Witnesses basically said there was when he was not, because he's a guy. He's a good guy. He's a good teacher, good rabbi. He's really, really good, but he's not divine. There was when he was not. And so the Orthodox said, false. There was never a time when he was not, because he is eternal. He is of the same essence. He's of the same stuff as God the Father. And this term that they used And we confess it, by the way, in the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed was written in Greek, and in Greek it says homoousion. That's a funny word, isn't it? Homoousion. It means same essence, same substance. God the Father and God the Son are of the same essence. They're not the same person. They're obviously different persons. They're different persons, but they are of the same divine stuff. And that's what we confess in the Nicene Creed, which actually is the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed from 381. Got it? There'll be a test afterwards. So to make sure we are confessing the Orthodox Catholic Christian faith, and we aren't heretics that are outside of the church, the divines understood, and that's why all we're doing here in this chapter is affirming things that have already been taught and confessed throughout the church. The Reformed are confessing the ancient Christian faith. They didn't have to make something new. Not everything needed to be reformed in the 16th and 17th century, and right here is a good example of it. And they say next, when the fullness of time had come, that is, when God had decreed it from before the foundation of the world. So before the foundation of the world, God decreed when the eternally begotten Son would come in the flesh. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, the covenant of redemption. When the fullness of time came, the eternally begotten Son, who is of the same essence as the Father, took upon him man's nature, Galatians 4:4. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law. Why? To redeem those who are under the law. That is why he came. This is why the Son took on all of the essential properties of man in order to do what we could not, in order to redeem his chosen people. As the confession puts it, he took on all the infirmities that we have. In other words, he had to eat, he had to sleep, he suffered, he was tempted, and yet, as Hebrews 4:15 says, he never sinned. He was tempted in every way, he suffered in every way, and yet, unlike us, he never sinned. And the great mystery of the incarnation is how the eternally begotten Son came in the flesh. As we see in the confession, repeating what the angel Gabriel says to the Virgin Mary, the Son came in the flesh and was conceived by the power of the Holy Ghost in the womb of a virgin. In other words, of her substance. And that, again, that's very important. It's all important, but that's important that they use that term. He's of the same substance as God the Father, and he's of the same substance as the Virgin Mary. He's not just divine, he's also human. He is of the substance of the Father and of the substance of his mother. Therefore, here it is, listen, he has two natures. The Son of God has two natures. Once he came in the flesh, two natures, divine and human. How many natures does Christ have? It's okay to say it. I want you to remember this. There was a time on the floor of Presbyterian when somebody asked a guy who wanted to be ordained, how many natures does Christ have? And he said 3. You're a heretic. We're not going to ordain you today. How many natures does Christ have? 2 natures. Really important. All right, here's where it gets really hard, okay? Because what's this called, the 2 natures? This brings us to our second consideration. It's called hypostatic union. As we seek to answer the question, who is Christ, hypostatic union helps us to understand how his divine nature and his human nature exist in one person. Don't worry, it's not just a big scary word, it actually applies to us. It's actually really important for us for a couple of reasons. Okay? Hypostatic union. So we've seen the incarnation and being incarnate. How are we allowed to talk about the way Christ is, the way he's partially divine and partially human? Is that what we say? Do we say he's partially divine and he's partially human? Do we say he's 50-50? Do we say Jesus is 50% God, 50% man? Do we say sometimes he's divine and other times he's human? Do we say he's composed of different parts? Do we say his two natures convert into one person? Do we say his humanity's over there, his divinity's over here? How do we talk about him? Well, it's none of those things. If we say any of those things, we're outside of the church. That's not good. We don't want to be that. So here is the orthodox way of talking about the two natures, divine and human, of Christ. The two whole, perfect, and distinct natures, the Godhead and the manhood, in the incarnation, right? Beginning at his conception, he took on flesh, and thus two natures, divine and human. They were inseparably joined together in one person, without conversion, without composition, and without confusion. This is the hypostatic union. He's not composed of parts. He's not 50-50, and he doesn't change. He's wholly God and wholly man, truly God and truly man, very God and very man. Don't use numbers. Don't use math. He's not 75-25. He's not 100 and 100. He's not 50-50. Truly God, truly man. Very God, very man. Once he came in the flesh, there was never a time when he wasn't truly God and truly man. There was never a time when his two distinct natures, the Godhead and the manhood, were not inseparably joined together in one person, without conversion, without composition, and without confusion. Hypostatic union. The two natures are unchangingly united to one another. That's what hypostatic union means. Unchangingly united. His two natures, divinity, humanity, inseparably joined together, truly God and truly man. And for the Westminster Divines, this was nothing new. This was not a doctrine that needed to be improved upon or reformed during the Reformation, because it was handed down to us from the ancient church. You'll find it in the definition of Chalcedon on page 13. So what they were saying was, we are Orthodox Catholic Christians. We don't need to change this. What they did was they condensed it. Take a listen here to what we'll be confessing before the Lord's Supper. See if this sounds at all similar to what you confessed in chapter 8, paragraph 2. He was begotten of the Father before the ages regarding the Godhead, and in these latter days for us and for our salvation, born of the Virgin Mary, the God-bearer, regarding the manhood, one and the same Christ, Lord, only begotten, to be acknowledged in two natures, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. The distinction of the natures being in no way annulled by the union. In other words, he's truly God and truly man always. The hypostatic union doesn't take away anything from his two natures. And you might think, wow, this is really, I'm getting ready to sleep. But this is really important stuff. This is really important. The way we talk about Christ decides who's Christian and who's not. That's how important it is. As Chalcedon says, the property of each nature being preserved and concurring in one person. How many persons does Christ have? How many persons is the Son of God? One. How many natures? Two. Divine and human. You guys got to get ready for that test. The divines didn't need to change Chalcedon. Far from it. They condense it. And thus the Reformed faith is the Catholic faith. And there are two very important applications regarding the mystery of the hypostatic union. Two things that we can take from it for us here today. The first is why we don't make images of God, in particular Christ. I got a lot of flack when I took down the pictures of Jesus. A lot. Remember that? He's bad. Why is he doing that? Why doesn't he love Jesus? Why doesn't he just leave all the pictures of Jesus? So we don't have images of God because he said not to at Sinai. Remember Exodus 20, verse 4? You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. So we don't make images because he told us not to. That's the first part, right? But also, we don't make images specifically of Christ because besides the fact that they are misrepresentations of God, so that's important. If you make a picture or an image or a carving or a statue, wake up of Christ, it's a misrepresentation. And someone says, that's not a misrepresentation. That's not his divinity that I'm drawing a picture of. That's not his divinity that I have a picture of. Well, then what is it? And they say, that's his humanity. And then you say, oh, I didn't know we could separate his humanity from his divinity. What are you talking about? Oh, Chalcedon says you can't separate. You can't take his divinity and his humanity and separate them. Why? Hypostatic union. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, it's true. So you can't say that's just a picture of his humanity, so don't worry about it. You can't pull away his humanity from his divinity. Why? Because he's truly God, truly man, forever. That's the first reason why we don't. Second, they go against the Ten Commandments, and so we try not to violate God's law if we can help it. So rather than dividing or separating the humanity of Christ from his divinity, Reformed Christians, and really all Christians, should embrace the mystery of the hypostatic union. Embrace the mystery of the hypostatic union of the person of Christ. Second, the two distinct natures of Christ existing in one person is related to salvation, which would make it quite applicable to our lives, don't you think? And that brings us to our final point this evening. Why is the hypostatic union, two natures in one person, why is that important for our salvation? I want you to think right now. Why do you think that might be important? That he's truly God, truly man, very God, very man, existing in one person, inseparably, always. Because that makes Christ uniquely qualified to be the one and only mediator between God and man. The hypostatic union makes Jesus qualified as the only one who can be the mediator between God and man. Because he's fully God and fully man. As the divines put it, which person is very God and very man, yet one Christ, the only mediator between God and man. To understand the implication of this doctrine for our salvation, we need to hear what the larger catechism has to say about the mediation of Christ. To be mediator, remember, that's a legal term. A mediator is a legal term. It's someone who mediates between two parties, reconciling two parties together. And so it's someone who comes in between the two parties. What do you think the two parties are with respect to Christ and his hypostatic union? God and man. Well, why would someone need to come between God and man? Genesis 2 and 3. Placed man in the garden, gave him the covenant, and he said, do this and live, do this and die. What did Adam do? As the representative of all mankind, what did Adam do? He failed. And that plunged all mankind into an estate of sin and misery and death. And we can never pull ourselves out of it. We can never pay the price for our sin, ever. And so God has to do it himself. But God's not the one who owes, so he also has to be man. Man owes God. Man can't pay God, so God comes in the flesh. Question 38 of the larger catechism. Why was it required that the mediator should be God? It was required that the mediator should be God, that he might sustain and keep human nature from sinking under the infinite wrath of God and the power of death. And he must be God in order to give worth and efficacy to his sufferings, his obedience, and his intercession. If it's just man, man can't do that on his own. He must be God. And yet God doesn't owe God. Man owes God. Do you see why hypostatic union is necessary? As a result of the fall, this is what mankind is in desperate need of, a mediator. But we can't do it ourselves. And so Christ, as God, does what man could not do, what only God in the flesh could do. And question 39. Why was it requisite that the mediator should be man? It was requisite that the mediator should be man, that he might advance our nature, perform obedience to the law, suffer and make intercession for us in our nature. Human nature had to pay the price. That we might have a fellow feeling with him as he suffered in our infirmities, that we might receive adoption as sons and have comfort and access with boldness to the throne of grace. He had to come in the flesh. He had to be man in order to accomplish that which we owed man, or that which we owed God, in order to advance our nature, in order to give us access to the throne. And he did this through his incarnation, through his perfect law-keeping, through his mediation on the cross, through his current intercession right now. Right now, he's making intercession for us, and he can only do that as God, man, very God, very man, hypostatic union. This is why the incarnation is absolutely necessary. Do we understand it 100%? No, and that's good. I don't want to understand it 100%. This is why hypostatic union is not only necessary, but absolutely vital in order for us to have salvation. Because we can't pay God the price for our sin. Only God can. And so he does. Will we ever fully grasp this? Hypostatic union? No. And that's okay. Will we ever fully appreciate what Christ has done for us as God-man, procuring our salvation for us as our mediator? Probably not until we meet him face to face. And therefore, beloved, it is a mystery. What God has done for us in Christ, the incarnation, the hypostatic union, his mediation is mysterious and it's beautiful. We ought to embrace this mystery, appreciate it, and it ought to result in doxology, in the worship of our triune God. Amen. And thanks be to God for Christ, the one who came, putting on humanity for us, living for us, dying for us, being raised to the throne and making intercession for us even now.